Flaherty, and this is Adult Autism with William. You can find me online at adultautismwithwilliam.com. My focus is primarily on adults diagnosed with level 1 autism, whether it be later in life or when you were a child. Today, I have Mike Howard as a guest. He's written a book entitled Not Me, Us, and later we'll share about where you can find him online. Previously, he was on the channel providing a brief overview of his experiences in my Autistic Profile Series, and we'll touch on some of those same questions as well as talk about a variety of things. As we are recording this, it is April 2026, and that is commonly known as Autism Awareness Month, among other variations of titles and stuff. So, welcome back to the show, Mike.
It's great to be here.
Well, now let's go ahead and even though you have written a book and it's very interesting, I had a chance to read it. You won't be able to share, of course, your whole story, but tell us the aspect in terms of um, when you were diagnosed, and then how easy or difficult was the process.
I was diagnosed, several days before my 51st birthday, so I was technically 50. Um, the actual diagnostic process, as I describe in the book, it was very thorough, but I kind of welcome that. Um, as you probably went through something similar. There's a series of interviews, and then there's problem solving, and there's look at your medical history and all that. So I I wanted all that. I wanted to be thorough. I wanted to be confident that whether or not I fit the criteria, I could know for sure that, the due diligence had been done. Now, getting to the point of being able to talk to somebody who would be willing to take me through the process, in my case, that took 18 years from the time I became self-suspecting. Um, and that I chalk that up to mostly one specialist in my area didn't even begin to consider working with adults until fairly recently. And to most of the garden variety people in psychiatric business, at least where I am, really don't know a whole lot about autism. So I could bring up the topic, but because I wasn't fitting their idea of what an autistic person should look like, they just kind of said, "Well, I don't think so," and changed the subject. So yeah,
Okay. Yeah. Now you mentioned what age you were when you were finally diagnosed. How many years ago was that then?
I just had my 56th birthday, so it's been 5 years now.
Hmm. Okay. Yeah. And of course, you mentioned about your area. You don't necessarily have to say you're a particular city, but I'm gonna tongue in cheek say, of course, you live in a small, mountainous, rural, and you're like, hundreds and thousands of miles from any big civilization, right? So that's why it was so difficult.
Well, no, I mean it's I live in one of the top 20 cities population wise in the United States. Um, and actually, as I understand, a lot of the autism research in uh, one of the foremost institutions in the world is in a city not too far from me. But so you'd think that maybe more people would be in the know, but I think we're still coming around in terms of even within the psychiatric profession, what people know, what people are able to talk about in an informed way.
Mhm. Yeah, this always reminds me back years ago. I myself, I was 60 when I was diagnosed, and I just turned 62. But while I my main work over the years has been in the area of psychology or counseling. Prior to uh, uh, declaring that as a major, I was a nutrition major. And so
Mm,
one of the things, and this is where I'm drawing a parallel, is it's interesting to know that, of course, medical doctors are usually the first line where people will like talk about nutrition and diet. And maybe it's changed, and maybe depending on the program, but it's kind of like a medical doctor has very little training in nutrition, and yet
right,
they will be giving a lot of medical advice. Likewise, those that even work maybe with diagnosing autism, they are primarily with the younger set, kids usually. And so there's not as much training. Now that's changing here over the last 10 years or so, but there's a long way to go. But yes, so sadly, even in, larger areas like you're at, I'm in a much smaller area, but not too far from some major things. And so, yeah, part of my story is that I suspected around, 18 years prior to when I was diagnosed, and I couldn't find anyone that was doing that, and I just kind of
right,
gave up.
right, right. Yeah, that's a very similar pass. Is that every time I brought up the topic, it was just again a pretty much automatic dismissal, and you can't be autistic because fill in the blank. I've heard some of the most absurd ones out there, and it's like, well, what do I do? I'm pretty sure myself, but how do I even talk to somebody who's willing to continue that conversation with me? And I think that you too were diagnosed with ADHD before your autism, and
Correct.
that's pretty much my situation too. Is I had a really easy time finding somebody to diagnose with me with ADHD, and that was in 2006. And that was before the dual diagnosis was even possible. Um, so, I mean, that kind of automatically for the next 7 or 8 years put me kind of out of the circle of people even be considered for autism because I'd already been diagnosed ADHD. And it wasn't until those changes in the DSM and me kind of, looking through that and thinking, oh, you know what? I think it's both, but, it's a matter of proving it. That I eventually stumbled upon somebody that, and it was, as is not unusual, even once I found a practitioner, I was on a waiting list for over a year, but at least I knew that I was in line. So,
Right, yeah, and then part of the challenge is, and we'll get into some different aspects of the following, but for me, what comes to mind, and I didn't preface this that I usually am very meticulous because of my other main hobby of C.S. Lewis. Whenever I do interviews, I plan out, chart out my questions, and I kind of pitch it to the other people and saying that, oh, or, oh, this is for your convenience, but part of it is for me to be prepared as well as to make sure they don't answer a question or give information that I plan to ask about later.
right.
But in this case here, I have more of a skeleton set of questions here, so that's a little bit different from my approach here. But nevertheless, when you have a decent enough working knowledge, in other words, I know I've heard you say that you don't claim to be an expert. You're sharing your experience.
Mhm.
Likewise for myself, and it's an ever growing sense of awareness, and some things that might be helpful for me may not be helpful for you, and vice versa. Nevertheless, this broad topic, which I guess I could have thrown out there to have your brain ready for it, since you don't have all the questions in advance here, is for me. I think part of the challenge is that the or the lack of understanding about what we have currently in 2026. I preface the year because 5 years from now it may change, and that is the different levels. So most
Mhm.
people tend to associate autism with what might be considered the level 2 or 3,
You're
and the
right.
language now at currently the preferred language is for level 1. The main summary point is support needed.
Hmm.
Level two, substantial support needed. Level three, very substantial support. And while that's not maybe a perfect way of summarizing it, at least it gives a starting point there. But what are your thoughts in terms of not maybe critiquing the level system, but the challenge in terms of people not understanding that
Hmm.
someone that is level one, oh, you can't be autistic because when I think of autism, I think of my nephew or my niece
Hmm.
who's, 8 years old and she's diagnosed and, I don't know if she's level two or three, but she does blah, blah, blah. And you can do that or you don't do that. So you can't be autistic.
Right. And I try to have a lot of patience with the general public on this. I know that a lot of people who call themselves advocates, and I'm hesitant to even claim that term because I know that for some people it's associated with some negativity. But yeah, I mean it's a lot of folks in the community who, like us, are able to get themselves out there and talk and advocate and articulate and educate. Okay, yeah, we don't necessarily look like level two or three, and like I say, I try not to antagonize people who might not get that right off the bat. But I try to explain, well, yes, this is why it is a spectrum. Um, and I'm actually pretty much okay with the level system. It's not perfect. And I agree with those who say that, um, yes, it's a dynamic disability, so my ability to function under one set of circumstances and my ability to function under another set of circumstances might put me in one level or another, just to, you know, you know, depending on my, coping at the time. I get that, right? It's not a perfect system, but I think in terms of one's overall average ability to do things day in and day out, I think it I think it's pretty accurate. So what do we tell folks that say, okay, yeah, I know autistic people, there's no autistic kids in my family and this and that, and they can't talk or they're still in diapers or, they will never be able to drive and, that sort of thing. But you, I mean, I'm like, what do I say? Yeah, well, I- I've been blessed. I've been able to do many of these things. Um, it's just a little steeper hill, right?
Mhm.
Um, on many things. Now, I may be gifted with some things that just amaze people. For instance, ability to, in your case, recall quotes. You
Mhm.
know, um, and people could tend to overgeneralize. You're so good at this. Why do you have so much problem with, you name it, normal small talk, But it's I try to explain it when talking to people as okay, normal everyday functioning for people without autism might be somewhere up here, okay? Normal everyday functioning with somebody with level one might be right here. I mean, now I can with a lot of work I can maybe get up here sometimes, but I'm still struggling here,
It's
you
a big
know.
effort.
Right. It's more effort. It takes more out of me, and there's still some things that I still confound me, right? But and then as you go, with the other levels, you're just taking it down a notch. I mean, again, that's not a perfect explanation, but I think for maybe it kind of gets through to people a little bit better that stated that way.
Mhm. Right. And then while I'm sure everyone experiences, like I had some really great thoughts about 45 seconds ago, and then the moment you stop talking, they just went whoop.
Right.
And
I do
so,
that frequently, yes.
oh yeah. And so as I continue to jabber here, it may suddenly hit me, or I may just go to another question here. And right now, it's not suddenly hitting me. Well, maybe this was part of it, and that is in the type of work that not that long ago, I changed jobs to where I but the previous job, I was there for 18 years. And in terms of a summary, in terms of an example of part of what you're talking about is my job was the same, yet it was different from when I started to when I left that job. And that is, there were some different expectations, there was some fine tuning, and there were some things. Yeah, there's a talk about the unwritten rules, and that's more challenging for people who are autistic. And so I left there, and before leaving, in fact, that was part of what had me looking for other possibilities. And that is that I don't know that things were made explicit in terms of some of these different changes. And I'm not going into big detail because we're mainly talking with you about some of your experiences and stuff. And so it doesn't matter so much about the specifics other than someone would say, well, you've been doing this job for almost 18 years. How come you're having trouble with blah, blah, blah? And, I've shared some different elements of that, but yes, from one day to another or certain stresses, it's like in the last month, my car, the brake light came on, flashing. And so it was functioning okay. I had a pretty good uh, notion that it wasn't going to just stop working. But then at the end of the day, uh, I couldn't get out of the parking lot where I was at. So I was in full panic mode,
Oh,
per se. And so I was fortunately in where someone that I've used as a mechanic was not that far away. And between talking with that person, I was able to get him on the phone and get over there. I was still kind of rattled. So I'm sure I came across less than a level one in terms of support needs. We'll just say, but anyway, but yeah, normally in terms of we maybe won't get into a lot of defining of terms, but that masking
mhm.
type thing in terms of being good at observing and then mimicking and things of that nature. But anyway, but yeah, so let me not necessarily change corners, but in terms of just additional layer here, and that is, what would you say are traits that maybe aren't as obvious for people to notice that is not necessarily exclusively associated with autism, but it is definitely in that range of things that would be considered a autistic trait. So autistic traits that others might not notice that you have.
I think that one of the biggest ones is that the way we process, right?
Hmm.
Um, and I mean, to the best of my understanding, that is because we have a far more dense neural net than non-autistics. Um, so it's very easy for us to get overwhelmed. It's even easy for something to be too much for us. And this is kind of how we're given that oversensitive label. And probably by neurotypical standards, yes, we do seem very oversensitive. But it's just because um, our filter for the world is not the same as someone else's. Um, and that accounts for that difference. And that's one thing that you always are dealing with as an autistic person is that these differences that really aren't up to you um, are often interpreted as character flaws, right? And and then it's on top of all that, it's up to us to try to explain that to other people without looking like we're just trying to, cover our butts and make excuses. So I mean, I think that's there. I just did the same thing you did. Is there's another example that came to mind as soon as I started, and I've lost it. But
Well, it's ironic here what you shared for that point there, and that is that's exactly what I was thinking of in different words in terms of something that I learned early on that was a huge discovery. I was and I still am at this point involved in a weekly small group online through one of the online services. And the person leading the small group shared that it's not a matter of being slow at processing things. Now, there could be some people who are, but
Mhm.
it's a matter of the filter that there's so much stuff sensory coming in that we don't have that filter that others have in terms of the input. And so I know, for example, if I'm out and I call my wife and she's watching TV, I gently remind her, honey, please mute the TV or pause it. I can't focus on the conversation. Now, that's
Exactly.
not exclusive, I guess, to a autism person, but that's something that's definitely I can't filter that
Right.
out, and so
And,
it's a matter
and
of so much to filter.
if I'm driving with someone else in the car, I can't have both the radio on and try to have a conversation with them. One or the other has to go. And sometimes both have to go, depending on the driving situation.
Well, exactly. Yeah. To be able to focus. Yeah. Well, like I actually do stop my music or podcast. Obviously, for a podcast, I probably I should it when I'm pull up to a drive-through to order food. But if I'm just listening to music, I will turn down the music or turn the music off to focus on ordering. And
Right.
don't you just love it when you go to a fast food restaurant that maybe you haven't been to in a couple months, and then your favorite thing is not on the menu anymore? And
Right.
so now you have to think up of what you want, and
Right.
you're too embarrassed to say, or are you too hungry to go, okay, I don't want anything, goodbye. Uh, which I've never done, but I've been tempted to.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and at least these days, if I'm going to a restaurant that I've never been to, you can usually look up the menu online
Hmm.
because I've done that. I've been handed a menu that's like 7 pages long, it's just too much for me to process, and I guess I'll have a cup of soup. It's which is not really what I wanted, but I just can't sort through it all. It's
Uh, yeah. Well, that reminds me that, one of the things that is a stereotypical thing doesn't mean all autistic people are
Right,
this
of
way.
course.
But in terms of like food, if I go to a buffet, I will eat all the foods that I enjoy. And then if I'm still hungry, I'll venture out. In other words, I'll go for the familiar
Right.
instead of and whatnot. So and then if it's a restaurant I've not gone to, or if it's a type of food that I don't eat very often, I don't know if I want to go there. What's our other options? I might say to my wife or some friends or whatever. But anyway, well, now how about I'm curious, and this is something that's in the profile series, and I'll pitch the question, but I want to say something else about that series, so you know what I'm pitching here, and that is, what are traits that others may not necessarily notice? I'll have your answer in a second. But in terms of just the series itself, I bring it up not just to promote my other content, but one of the things that the reason why I wanted to do that and have different people share their stories is to help people to see something that we'll touch on here probably, and that is no two autistic people are alike is a famous paraphrase of a quote. And so it lets people be aware by seeing some of the different personality from the different individuals that I've done so far in this profile series. But anyway, enough plug of my other content. What are some traits that you consider that you have because of your autism that others may not necessarily notice?
Oh goodness, I'm trying to recall what I said when I did your thing
And you
last
better
year.
say the same thing, right? No.
Um, Uh, I think that something that necessarily is, I don't know if this is in, it hits it head on, but just the amount of mental energy that I put into almost everything um, that involves coping from day to day.
Hmm.
uh, which involves a great deal of planning, a great deal of considering the contingencies, a great deal of making sure that I'm prepared for, um, uh, someone throws me a curveball, um, trying to be as proactive as possible to prevent anything like that from happening. Um, so, I mean, it's always trying to stay one step ahead of um, the next thing I have to deal with. Whereas at least my hunch is that non-autistic people can just go do things without
Hmm.
having all that constant um, anxiety and planning and cogitation, for lack of a better term. And a lot of people might think that, oh, you're just overthinking. Well, yes and no. I mean, yes, I'm expending a lot of mental energy, but I find when I don't do those things and just throw myself into a situation that I'm more likely to shut down, get just completely flustered and not know what to do. Right.
Well, let's go ahead and finish up with having you share about where people can get a copy of your book and then where they can find you online.
Okay, my book is on Amazon. Not Me, Us. The story of a middle-aged autistic and the quest to empower others with similar stories. I think I got it on permanent markdown for 950 US dollars. Um, and my new website, after doing a lot of experimentation on social media and just deciding to start over again, is called Lost Wisdom. And it's basically, I call it that because us much later diagnosed individuals are colloquially named as the lost generation. So I'm just coming from that perspective.
Okay, and that's actually a Facebook group, right?
Facebook group, correct.
Okay. All right. Well, great. Well, we encourage people to check out that on Facebook, and then I'll have a link in the description for people to check out your book on Amazon as well. Well, Mike, I
Wonderful.
appreciate you taking the time to visit with me and chat about these things. And I,
Oh yeah, I've thoroughly enjoyed this. I hope we have a chance to do it sometime soon again.
right. Well,
Okay.
so thanks again, Mike, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thank you, William.
Thanks for joining me for the show today. Originally, the conversation continued, but because the focus shifted, I decided to end the episode here. The next part focuses on elaborating on a handout Mike gives when he speaks to the public that he calls 10 Ways That You Can Support Autistic People That Cost You Nothing. So be on the lookout for that soon. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation with Mike and will consider getting a copy of his book and checking out his Facebook group. There are links in the description for both. Also, there is a link to the playlist of my Autistic Profile series. Thanks again for watching. I'm William O'Flaherty, and this is Adult Autism with William.